I'm scared to speak today because I'm scared that there isn't protection. I'm scared not to speak today because I see what's happening around me every day, and it's urgent. It's absolutely urgent.
Belle Zakary is a clinical psychologist who's worked at the United States Department of Veterans Affairs for over a decade. She was one of about a dozen federal workers who spoke at a town hall meeting Oregon Democratic leaders held recently at a federal building in Northeast Portland.
I don't want to hear that you agree the Doge is bogus. Everyone in this room knows that. Woo! I don't want to hear compliments about my service. I don't want to hear compliments about my bravery. I don't want to hear any preaching to the choir. I would love for somebody to be like, your job's secure. But you know what else? I want everyone in this room to hear that too. I don't want to hear it myself if you can't say it to all of us.
From the Gerboil studio, I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. Over the past couple of months, the Department of Government Efficiency has slashed jobs at federal agencies as part of an effort to fulfill the president's campaign promise to cut the federal government. And it's not just layoffs. There has been a lot happening at the federal level.
Some of Oregon's biggest trading partners are striking back after tariffs on imports took effect this week.
The Trump administration's federal funding freezes could have serious consequences for firefighting in the Pacific Northwest.
Members of Oregon's congressional delegation have seen huge audiences at local town halls over the past week.
And the Associated Press is suing 3 Trump administration officials over access to presidential events.
In Central Oregon, Deschutes County commissioners recently voted to end a county DEI committee.
In a state known for protests, the recent demonstrations around Oregon feel different.
United will never be divided.
It's been hard to keep up with, even just as a news consumer. And as a journalist, it's been difficult to figure out what to focus on and how all of these changes impact us here in the Pacific Northwest. But that is our job. Today, we'll hear from OPB reporters who cover a wide range of beats about what they've been reporting on and what they're hearing. Up first is Bryce Dole, who covers Oregon politics and government for OPB. He was at that town hall meeting where Belle Zakary and other federal workers spoke up about their frustrations and fears.
It was packed. There were dozens, if not hundreds, of current and former employees for the federal government who were there, who were all, it seemed, very concerned about the Trump administration's efforts to shrink the federal government over the last couple of months since Trump's term began. These included people who were with the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, people who are with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Forest Service. I mean, you name it. These are some agencies that really impact Oregonians' lives in one way or another, and they came out to talk about why they were concerned about these cuts. And not only that, but how the cuts are affecting their own lives and the lives of a lot of other federal employees, too. Just to kind of give you a sample of that, there were people who were talking about how they were struggling to pay off their student loans because they were fired, or what that would mean for paying for affording health insurance. People who are years from retirement who might not be able to retire at the same times that they previously thought that they did because they were just fired. The really striking thing about this town hall was that there are a lot of current members of the federal government, people who are currently employed, who came out speaking with their names in public against their own government, basically saying, we are concerned about how this is going to impact very vulnerable people like those on Social Security, again, veterans, people who are housing unstable. And they're also concerned about how some of these cuts could affect things like our public lands, how we fight against wildfire and protect against wildfire, really some of the cornerstones of Oregon life. It was a really striking thing to see.
Wow. So I know this was the latest in a series of packed town halls across Oregon. During last month's congressional recess, representatives returned to their districts, and many of them held town hall meetings. What were those meetings like for members of the Oregon delegation?
They were similarly packed and tense often. And these include town halls for both the Democrats and our lone Republican in the state, Cliff Bentz. For Democrats, a lot of what they heard from the people who attended these town halls was just uneasiness about these barrage of new policies from the Trump administration and from Trump's billionaire ally, Elon Musk, who is leading this government initiative called the Department of Government Efficiency, which aims to basically dramatically shrink the federal government by firing mass amounts of people to eliminate spending and to eliminate national debt. I think there was a lot of people who attended these town halls who were frustrated that the Democratic Party nationwide just seems very disunified right now, right? People were calling on these members of Congress to do more, accusing them of being caught flat-footed, saying that the Trump administration is actually doing exactly what Trump said that he would do, pushing forward these policies that could have a very quick impact on people's lives. And people just seemed like very dissatisfied.
And like you said, Cliff Bentz is the lone Republican representing Oregon in Congress right now. How were things different for him in terms of the feedback he got from constituents?
A lot of these town halls that he held were in some of the rural parts of the state, right? These are heavily Republican areas like LeGrand and Baker City, areas in eastern and in southern Oregon. And they were packed with people who were shouting at him. I think at one point he actually threatened to leave a town hall because people were shouting at him so much. And it really kind of was this moment where Cliff Bentz had to stand in front of people who were concerned about their own neighbors that were being fired and had to tell them, look, shrinking the federal government is difficult. It's a arduous process and it's going to take time before the benefits of that are felt. But he had to stand by the Trump administration's, efforts, basically saying like, this is necessary. We need to shrink spending. We need to cut spending. So it's seeming to be a difficult political task for both parties attending these town halls and trying to show their constituents that they're doing the jobs that they're supposed to be doing.
Well, Bryce, thank you for your hard work and thank you for checking in with us how things have been on your beat lately.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm April Ehrlich. I'm a reporter covering lands and environmental policies here at Oregon Public Broadcasting.
So the federal government fired thousands of people. Then a judge ordered they be hired back. What does that mean for the Forest Service specifically?
Yeah, so it means thousands of workers who were told that they were fired should now have their jobs back, even those who work for the Forest Service, which is managed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. These positions include a wide range of roles, like people who worked at visitor stations, park rangers that patrolled campsites, and biologists that assessed ecosystems ahead of issuing logging and grazing permits. So this was all a big deal for Oregon because over half of the state's land base is owned and managed by the federal government. If we don't have people there to manage camping reservations, check abandoned campfires, monitor the impacts of wildfires, then things could get hairy in our far-reaching public lands. So while the judge's ruling did reverse some of those firings, some employees I've spoken to said they just don't feel safe going back. There are theories that they'll just be fired again. And some managers are having trouble with onboarding, particularly seasonal staff, including firefighters. Every district seems to be different, and that could just be from managers not knowing what exactly they're supposed to do amid all of this chaotic back and forth between firings, rehirings, and freezes.
And I want to talk a minute specifically about wildfires. I understand some of the people you've spoken with have said they are particularly concerned about staffing for the next wildfire season. What are you hearing?
So those workers I mentioned earlier, like the park rangers, biologists, and foresters, most are also certified firefighters for the Forest Service that the agency can tap when they're low on staffing, which is often, especially as wildfires get more extreme and require more hands on deck. So like 2 people I spoke to said they spend more than half of the year working on fire lines in Oregon and sometimes other states, since the agency tends to shift people around depending on which districts need more help. If we do see more reductions in staff later down the line at the Forest Service, then chances are we are going to have fewer people available to fight fires on federal lands. And we also won't have as many people around to manage all the other components of firefighting support, like getting cooks for fire camps and hiring contractors for specialized help. This could also impact Oregon at the state level. So firefighting agencies tend to have what's called mutual aid agreements, meaning they help each other out and share resources. So federal firefighters also help Oregon state firefighters and vice versa. I've asked staff with the Oregon Department of Forestry if they might have to fight more fires on federal lands because of insufficient staffing on their end, but ODF says it's still too soon to tell if that's going to be needed.
Meanwhile, President Trump issued some executive orders specifically related to timber production. What effects could that have on Oregon?
Yeah, so Trump issued a couple of orders that basically call on federal land agencies to prioritize timber production. So fast-track timber sales as best as they can and circumvent endangered species protections when possible. It's important to remember that executive orders like this are basically just guidelines. They don't really have teeth. That said, federal leaders are likely going to take this message seriously. Many of them were chosen by President Donald Trump because they valued resource extraction like cutting trees and mining. So in Oregon, environmental groups are keeping a close eye specifically on the Northwest Forest Plan Amendment. Remember, this is the set of logging rules that came out of the timber wars of the 80s and 90s. It applies to most West Side national forests in Northern California, Oregon, and Washington, something like 25 million acres. So the Northwest Forest Plan is getting an update after about 30 years, and that update is still in the works with a public comment period ending this month. Some fear that years-long effort will soon disappear, or that the entire plan itself will go away. A lot of folks in the timber industry blame the plan for decreasing timber production, so there is a good chance that it could disappear or be significantly weakened under this administration.
And April, what changes have you had to make to the way that you are even doing your job since the new administration came in January?
Yeah, I would say I've long considered myself to mostly be a local reporter focused on local policies and state policies. And I would say the Trump administration has changed that to make me more of a federal reporter, which is just something I'm not used to. And it's definitely a new world for me. But it's also extremely exhausting because things are changing rapidly. And it's difficult to learn about something new like federal firefighting and how that works, and then also report on it within a day, and then have it change the day after that, and then have it change again the day after that. So yeah, I've been a little exhausted, and I would say recently I'm kind of taking more of a backseat approach to just kind of waiting and seeing how things play out before reacting to them.
Another federal agency that is super important to the Pacific Northwest is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. OPB's Southwest Washington Bureau Chief Eric Newman has been looking into how cuts to that agency could play out here.
Yeah, so NOAA does a bunch of different things in the Northwest, things that the average person probably knows about, like the weather forecasts from the National Weather Service, which is a branch of NOAA. They do seasonal outlooks for farmers. If anybody has ever experienced a wildfire, they may have watched the videos on Facebook where you can see incident meteorologists who kind of monitor wildfire weather conditions. They also have a huge impact on coastal fisheries. So they do surveys about fish health. They do things called stock assessments. They maintain weather buoys that are out in the ocean to make sure that it's safe for people on boats.
So what's the scope of the layoffs that have been happening?
It's been a little bit difficult to get clear information. Senator Patty Murray of Washington State said in mid-March that there was 650 people who had been laid off nationally. There is another expectation that there will be another 1,029 people fired, although that does not seem to have happened yet as of when we're talking right now. At this event with Senator Murray, she had a few different federal workers on who had been fired. One of them was in the first round of layoffs in late February. He said he was at his desk and got an email that gave him 68 minutes notice before he had to leave his job.
Wow. How do you think what's been happening will affect commercial fisheries in Oregon and Southwest Washington?
Well, it's definitely not going to be good for NOAA. People that I spoke with at different events said that the agency was already understaffed. They're already relying on volunteers in some cases to help with some of this fish survey work that they do. The exact extent of how bad it's going to be for NOAA probably depends on who is fired. I spoke to one fisherman out of Newport, Oregon. His name is Gary Ripka, and we were talking at the Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting in Vancouver.
You have to regulate the fish. You don't want to overfish the fish. So you have to have stock assessments in order to regulate. So if you don't have people to do the stock assessments, if there's cuts, then they might just say we're done until we get people.
And Eric, this has been a period of change for a lot of people, obviously. What changes have you had to make to the way you even do your job since the new administration came in?
I mean, I think there's a lot of concern that we're still sort of waiting for the actual effects of to trickle down to our daily lives. One thing that I kind of wonder about and worry about is just the reliability of information. As a reporter, we're really fastidious about where we get our information, and it's always been really reliable for me just to look at a .gov website and think that that was a safe place to get information. But when you see words being removed from federal government websites and whole programs just deleted, where you see one of those 404 websites that shows that something is gone, I think it throws a lot of that into question.
The Trump administration is asking lots of folks who took buyouts or got fired from the Bonneville Power Administration to come back to work.
That's OPB Morning Edition host Jess Hazel with yet another example of the whiplash federal employees and the general public are experiencing right now. Investigative reporter and editor Tony Schick has been covering the drama unfolding at the Bonneville Power Administration. It's a federal agency that often flies under the radar. And if you're not exactly sure what BPA does or how it works, you're not alone.
Yeah, it's what's called a federal power marketer, which means it's an arm of the federal government that sells electricity. It sells electricity from dams here in the Northwest, 31 different dams. And that's about a third of all the power that we consume in the Northwest. It also owns like 75% of the transmission grid. So, the lights in this studio are on probably in no small part because of BPA.
Last month, you reported that the BPA could lose nearly 20% of its workforce because of President Donald Trump's efforts to shrink the federal government. What were the practical implications of those workforce reductions?
Yeah, the one that would stand out to most people is the chance of power outages, unplanned power outages. So these are people who dispatch power, who balance the grid to make sure that the lights stay on and that the power lines are working properly. And if you have fewer people, you're going to have shortages in, people available to do that job. And some people who pay close attention to this said the chances of an unplanned outage go from what used to be less than 1% to, maybe more than 10%.
Wow. So you've been doing continuing coverage of this, I know. What has changed since your initial reporting?
So in our initial reporting, it was hundreds of people leaving BPA, and that's still true. But BPA, the administrator, has been able to make the case for some employees coming back. Some of the probationary employees that were fired have been rehired because their work is essential. They've been able to make the case for that. They've also been able to make the case that BPA should be exempt from some of these reductions because it's self-funded, because it's paid for by ratepayers in the Northwest. It's not tax funded. And BPA is also trying to bring back some of the employees who took a buyout that was offered by the Trump administration. Not sure yet how many people that will be. But this all changes really fast. So that's what I know right now.
Well, Tony, thank you so much for coming in and doing this check-in with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Coming up after a break, we'll hear about how potential Medicaid cuts could affect Oregonians. And because we all get tired of doom and gloom, we'll hear what's been making our reporters happy lately. Congressman Cliff Bentz represents Oregon's 2nd District in the U.S. House. His district spans most of the state east of the Cascades, and he's the only Republican in Oregon's congressional delegation. Last month, he voted in favor of the House budget resolution that would cut hundreds of billions of dollars in Medicaid funds over the next decade. Bentz recently told OPB why he thinks these cuts are necessary.
What I've been trying to do is say, let's look at this program because as we are currently proceeding down this path, it's not sustainable.
The specifics of how exactly the cuts could affect the millions of people who use Medicaid are still unclear. OPB reporter Amelia Templeton covers health and healthcare, and she's doing her best to keep up with what we do know about Medicaid cuts.
The best known piece of Medicaid in Oregon is the Oregon Health Plan. It provides health insurance and health care free of out-of-pocket costs for about a third of Oregonians and more than half of the kids in the state. It's also a program that, for very low-income seniors, can help them cover some of the out-of-pocket costs for Medicare, and in some cases also provides in-home support or adult foster care, nursing-level care for people with those needs, both older adults and also children and adults with disabilities. So a lot of different programs generally related to health and in-home supports.
So what do you know about what cuts could look like for Oregon?
Not much yet. We know that Congress, the Republicans in the House, passed a budget blueprint that would require $880 billion worth of savings or cuts over 10 years from the specific committee that oversees Medicaid. So a lot of people have interpreted that as essentially a mandate to cut Medicaid. There's not enough other programs overseen by that committee to sort of make up the money without touching Medicaid. In terms of how specifically they might go about making those cuts, we don't know much. The situation here in Oregon is this is a state that has really leaned into Medicaid. We expanded coverage beyond some of the traditional populations. We use state dollars specifically to cover undocumented people who can't be part of the federal program. So we're sort of all in on the Oregon Health Plan on Medicaid. And I think pretty clearly we're also a state that has really worked to minimize the cost growth of Medicaid. So I would say most people would probably point to our state program and say there's not a lot of fat to cut here easily. And providers across the state rely on Medicaid to get reimbursed for the care that they provide, particularly rural hospitals, hospitals that serve lower income populations. This is like a plank of how they stay open and how they fund themselves. And they're already saying that reimbursement rates are well below what it costs to provide the care to these groups of people. So I think this is not a small ticket item. This is one of the single most expensive things the state does. And so any significant cuts to federal funding would create a pretty big hole in the state's budget.
Yeah, definitely sounds like it. You know, a constant theme I think we're hearing from so many people is change. There's so much change going on to keep track of. For you, Amelia, as a reporter, what is the most challenging part about covering changes at the federal level and the impacts they're having in Oregon?
Oh, man, so many challenges, interesting challenges, exciting challenges, also hard ones. One is trying not to get into a reactive mode, trying to stay open-minded, trying to think about how these changes play out across people in our state who support them, people in our state who are afraid of them, and trying to keep all those perspectives in mind. And then I think the other part of it is just workload. I have a set of issues that I was covering before this, some of them very local to our state. And now there's another set of questions, big federal changes and sort of how they could shake out here. Just to throw out an example, I am covering in this legislative session the effort to renew the taxes at the state level that support the Medicaid program. And while that's all playing out, all of the legislators who are doing that work are wondering what is going to happen with Medicaid at the federal level. So there's just this added layer of uncertainty really across all the areas I cover.
President Donald Trump's trade war against America's three biggest trading partners drew immediate retaliation from Mexico, Canada, and China. The president's latest tariffs also sent financial markets into a tailspin yesterday. Beijing retaliated with tariffs on a wide array of U.S. farm exports, and Canada also plans to put tariffs on more than $100 billion of American goods.
The on-again, off-again tariffs can be hard to follow. Luckily, OPB's business reporter Kyra Buckley is all over it. Kyra, thank you very much for this check-in. So Which industries and sectors in Oregon would be most affected by tariffs?
Yeah, well, I'm going to just start by saying that tariffs are an import tax. So any company that imports something from one of these countries that might be targeted by tariffs or one of these industries, they're going to pay more. So really every industry is going to be impacted in some way. But in Oregon, we happen to be home to a lot of facilities for the semiconductor industry. So that's computer chips, basically. And we both export and import a lot of parts for that industry and a lot of electronics, computers, things like that that support the industry. And I want to say that semiconductors, that industry employs about 30,000 Oregonians, so it's a pretty big deal. And the state imported more than $9 billion worth of computer and electronic products last year. And we exported $14 billion worth to the global market. So pretty big deal, going to be impacted by tariffs. Another industry is agriculture. Our farmers send out a lot of goods to the global market, to Canada, to Mexico, and overseas.
And how have businesses in Oregon or the Northwest responded so far?
Yeah, so businesses in general don't like uncertainty. So all this kind of change and chaos is something they tend to shy away from, and they don't want to do a lot of long-term planning in this type of atmosphere. So companies I've heard from are kind of pulling back on investments, or maybe they're just choosing not to move forward with new investments, and that might be hiring people or building a new facility or starting a new project. Also, I've heard from companies that were able to, they tried to stock up on parts and other goods that they could before they thought tariffs might hit. But obviously, every company wasn't able to do that. And when you're talking about things like perishable goods, they may not have been able to. So businesses are kind of just doing their best to go with the uncertainty and the chaos, but they may be, having a hard time when it comes to long-term planning right now.
I'm Monica Samayoa. I'm the climate reporter at Oregon Public Broadcasting.
So, Monica, you've covered what's been going on with federal climate money in Oregon. What exactly is that money for?
That money is primarily earmarked for climate action, but there are some grants in there that'll help reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. I think the grant that most people are familiar with is the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, which Oregon was granted $197 million last year. That's a huge chunk of change. And so that grant would basically boost a lot of the state programs that we have now. One that people can kind of relate to would be the EV rebate program. So that grant would boost funding for that. So yeah, it was just a lot of federal money coming from the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, basically just here's all this money for climate action. Oregon did a really good job in having a really competitive application, which is why it was able to get so much money last year.
Okay, so what's the latest news on these funds?
It's tricky. The short answer is we have access. But 2 months ago, almost, when the Trump administration first stepped into office, he signed an executive order that immediately froze the funds. And so from there was a bit of a roller coaster of do we have access? No. But then, a few weeks later, that was rescinded and they did have access. And so when I talked to the State Department of Environmental Quality, they were yeah, we didn't have access, then we did, and then we didn't, and now we do. And so for now, the state does have access to these funds, but, the department even tells me, it's so fluid right now, we could have access today, tomorrow could be different.
And what are the consequences of that uncertainty?
I mean, ultimately, it would lead down to the state not being able to reach its greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, a warmer planet. It's kind of like a domino effect. If we don't have, federal help or invest in more into these programs that help people electrify or get into EVs, energy efficiency, we're just going to keep going on the same track that we are now, which is continue burning fossil fuels. That leads to, like I said, a warmer planet. It also leads to public health impacts with more pollution in the air. So we could see a domino effect of these things, of these consequences, continue to grow.
Speaking of uncertainty, Oregon was supposed to get federal money to install more electric vehicle chargers around the state. Is that still on track?
Kinda. It's been a thing going on for more than 2 years now. But last I spoke with the Oregon Department of Transportation, they told me that the state had already allocated $26 million to go toward public DC fast chargers on Highway 97, Interstate 5 south of Eugene, and Interstate 205. So that, from what ODOT told me, is moving forward. There is more funds that the state should have gotten and could still be allocated. It's just uncertain for now, but at least $26 million is coming to the state.
Well, Monica, thank you for all your hard work.
Thanks, you too.
We are all a little exhausted, and it's still important to make room in our lives for joy. So we asked each of the reporters we talked to for this episode to tell us about something that's making them happy right now.
The thing making me happy right now is a woman named Maisie Dobbs. I wish that was my new girlfriend, but no, Maisie is actually a character in a series of novels by Jacqueline Winspear. She is an investigator and a psychologist. It takes place in England between the world wars, and she's just a smartly written character. And at the end of the day, I just want to curl up with a good book.
Probably just seeing friends and spending time with my dog is the most reliable source of joy in my life.
There are new seasons of The White Lotus and The Righteous Gemstones, which are shows I really love, particularly because of Walton Goggins, whose name I can never say, but he has become one of my favorite actors and somewhat of a crush. And so I'm really enjoying watching both of those shows back to back.
My kids are 7 and 3, and I make up games with them. And the other day we were driving on I-5 South and made up a game that we were in a spaceship and firing missiles at enemy trucks.
I am obsessed with Wicked. It's funny because I've never seen the Broadway show, never heard the music. And then I went to the movies with my friend, in December, and my life changed. Every day is like a different Wicked song that I am obsessed with. But lately, it's been Dancing Through Life.
My sister had a baby a couple weeks ago, and I became an uncle for the first time. And so that was pretty amazing. I actually got to see the baby, I think like an hour or 2 hours after it was born. It was just amazing. Her name is Elliot, spelled with 2 T's and an E, and she's great.
I don't have the greatest garden myself, but I live across the street from one of the best gardeners in the city of Portland, and her magnolia is starting to bloom. A lot of her more exotic and interesting trees that I can't name are starting to bloom, and I get to look out my window at this incredible space that she has created every day. So that is making me really happy.
You can read full coverage of everything we've been talking about and plenty more from OPB's hardworking journalists at opb.org. Thanks for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. And an extra big thank you for telling your friends about us. Our show has now been downloaded more than 1 million times, y'all. Tune in next week for an episode all about 3 Pacific Northwest artists whose creativity is inseparable from food. Julie Sabatier produced this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. I engineered the episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Mia Estrada and Sage Van Wing. Mia recorded the audio from the event with federal workers, and Dave Miller did the interview with Congressman Cliff Bentz. You also heard the voices of OPB journalists Jess Hazel, Crystal Ligori, Jeff Norcross, Casey Negriff, and Donald Orr. The music in this episode is from Audio Network. And hey, if you have a question for us, please reach out. Email us at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.